All right. Thanks, Laura and Ron, for joining. I got Robert here from Indivisible 11 up here in Atlanta. But Laura, I guess I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself and your group down there in Florida.
Sure. My name is Laura Kane. I'm a member of the leadership team of Palm Beach Indivisibles. We are about a 2,000-plus member Facebook group, and we have over 900 email subscribers. And I'm also here with Ron Matzner, who is our president.
Well, yes, that is true. We have a 5-member leadership team, and it's a lot to handle, to be honest with you, with so many members. Palm Beach County is the largest county east of the Mississippi, and we had a natural advantage in increasing our membership early on because Mar-a-Lago is located in the center of our county. Matter of fact, about 2 miles from where I live. And so that's been an easy focal point for us in our early membership drives and in canvassing and our event planning.
Yeah, very interesting. So a little bit more about our group here. Indivisible 11, we name ourselves out of Georgia Congressional District 11. That is roughly northwest metro Atlanta. If you were to look at it on a map, it's going to look quite gerrymandered. It goes all the way up into the deep red part of the district. You got a couple of counties up in there. But the southern part of the district actually goes down into parts of Buckhead that are in the city of Atlanta. So it's a very interesting district. I have talked to my a little bit extended neighbors who have said, I don't have anything in common with those people deep up in the district. I don't even know why in the world Barry Loudermilk is my congressional representative. So it is a very interesting district. And we happen to neighbor District 6. And if you might remember, because we were talking about this just before we started, that was where the infamous John Ossoff Karen Handel race was.
I remember that. I wrote postcards for that.
Right.
And so we neighbor that district, and we have ties to the Indivisible group in District 6. We actually ran billboards, with our super PAC to support Lucy McBath, who, with a razor-thin margin, won, that, district over there in District 6. On our side, on the 11 side, we moved it about 8 or 9 points in that same one. But we have learned a lot. A little bit about our structure. Not quite as many. It seems like you guys have a little bit of a larger group, and it was interesting to hear you guys, quote, have a president and so forth. I would say we have leaders. I don't like to pat myself on the back and say I have a title, but we're leaders of the group, and we all can have our little niches. Some of us are in technology, some of us are just have leadership talents or, wrangling people together, others financial, and so forth. But I guess I'd call myself one of the leaders, the group here in Indivisible 11. So, appreciate, joining. And because one thing that I feel like we don't do enough of at times in our group is, number one, getting together enough. But I feel like there are opportunities like this to, I travel a lot for my day job. I'm not actually home. But there are still opportunities to do things like this, to reach out, record, and talk to other groups that are doing the same thing that we're doing here. And, before we, set this up, one of the things, Laura, you wanted to talk about, Trump's going to go at some point, whether we have to drag him out of the White House kicking and screaming or whatever. But what is it going to look like, once we, take him out of the White House and move forward? And I think I kind of quote you here. What values do we want to protect and defend, and how will we heal the deep divides in our nation?
Yeah, actually, and Ron can really speak to this too. I'm sure, Robert, you, like all of the Indivisible leaders got the recent email from Indivisible National wanting us to begin to think about life after the Trump presidency. And I know for me, beyond having a giant wine hangover, I am going to be, and doing a lot of celebrating. It's going to be actually a little bit scary. I mean, they're a big relief, of course, but if we think about where we are as a nation right now and how we have two opposing groups struggling to define who we will be going forward, to me, that's the existential question here. We have two very different views of what America should be. And what do we, as Indivisibles and resistance members, progressives, concerned citizens, whatever we want to call ourselves, what do we want for our country? And Ron very eloquently said this to me the other day, that, we have to begin to think about what we want. We can't just be against Trump, because eventually Trump will go. And then what are we left with?
Yeah, and I'd like to add to that when we were, as an indivisible group, heading into our was soon to be, I guess, our fourth year. We started, I guess, in 17, 18, 19, so our fourth year. We're concerned, of course, with maintaining the enthusiasm and the engagement and the commitment of our membership. And one of the ways, I think, to do that is to begin right now on focusing on not only a 2020 strategy to do whatever we can to get rid of Trump, but what you might think of as a 2021 or a 2025 strategy about, well, what do we want our country to look like? What should our democracy look like? How do we save our democracy as we go forward in the years after Trump? And in a way, sometimes I make the point, which gets everybody angry at me. If I want to get everybody in a room upset with me, I say something like, well, in a way, in the long run, our children and grandchildren may think it was a good idea for Trump to be president, and it may have been good for America because it has awakened so many people. It's not just how many people voted in the 2018 election compared to 2014 or 2010, but the enthusiasm certainly among progressives and among left-center people is amazing compared to what it was 5 years ago or 10 years ago. And it's all this has enabled the divisions and the problems that have caused the divisions. I like to go back and not just talk about, well, we have two tribes, two camps, and it's such a divisive society. But there are issues in this country that legitimately have led to those divisions. And we need to begin right now to determine how we're going to address those things going forward after Trump is gone.
Mm-hmm. And all the travels that I do, I mean, just one of the comments you might find very interesting. My job has taken me up to Canada a good bit, last year and this year, and some comments that I've heard that they just, had their reelection for Prime Minister, and Trudeau. He lost some support, but he still, maintained and continued. But the comment that, or one of the ones I heard is, they only campaigned for about 40 days up there. Our campaign cycles literally go on for years.
It's continuous, yeah.
and that is draining. We've already mentioned that sentiment, that it is draining on, folks who are trying to get out there and make a difference, and then struggles, mentioned a little bit ago as well. I've heard sentiments from some of our people saying, you can't say that in a campaign, or you can't say that because that's going to bring out the other side of the base. I disagree with that. If this were normal politics, if this were a Bush running against, who was Bush running against, a caucus or someone like that, okay, yeah. I can maybe get on board with that. But we are way too polarized right now for this to be, quote, normal politics. And unfortunately, you have to really get on one side or the other. And you have to, because a vote for any sort of third party right now, especially on the presidency, is really a vote for for trouble, honestly, at this point.
Well, unless it's a vote that a Republican would make in place of Trump, then that's a good vote. As long as the Democrats, as long as everybody else votes for Democrats, but some Republicans splinter off and they do a write-in candidate, that, if they're not going to vote for a Democrat, at least please don't let them vote for Trump. And I have to say that I have a number of friends who identify as Republicans who are not happy with him. They're not what I would call the radical right, but they're not pleased with the idea of voting for a Democrat. So I'm not sure if this particular group of people would, if they were not going to vote for the Democrat, I feel pretty certain that they're not going to vote. They're not going to vote for Trump. So, we may have sort of a reverse situation from 2016. And who knows what things will be like after the impeachment hearings conclude.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, I think the impeachment is way overrated in terms of what what the results may be in terms of the election. There is only one way we're going to be able to get rid of Trump, and that's by electing someone else. He's clearly not going to be impeached. That's never going to happen. And it's just political theater in a sense. So, and I understand why Pelosi tried so hard to keep the House from engaging in an impeachment at the time that she did. But Trump sometimes I think Trump actually did this intentionally, what he did in the Ukraine, because he honestly believes an impeachment's going to be good for him, for his base, and it will help him win the election. I do a lot of traveling around the country too for my work, and you'd be amazed. You get away from the coast, and very few people truly understand the nuances of all of the issues that we watch so carefully. Hopefully Trump won't be right about that.
Yeah, that is so true. Even my mom has told me, she sat me down and she goes, "Robert, are you okay?" I said, I think I'm okay. I think I'm doing just fine, Mom. She goes, okay, well, the family's just kind of worried about you. Just want to make sure. Now, this is I would call my family mostly Bush Republicans. And, of course, I would say a number of them, did vote for Trump. And, they're seeing, all my political work and everything. And, but, yeah, it's funny to hear that, commentary coming back from my family. But going back to...
Are you okay?
Well, Thanksgiving dinners all around the country might be very interesting in a couple of weeks. Yeah. I have this vision of people. My wife and I used to do a lot of business in the old Soviet Union, and whenever you go to a meeting, the Russians would be sitting on one side of the table, and we'd be sitting on the other side of the table. Of course, the vodka would always be in the middle. And I'm wondering if that's how tables are going to be set up, for Thanksgiving, whether the Trumpites on one side and progressive on the other side, and God knows what will be in the middle in place of the vodka. I don't know. So,
I have an interesting story for you, actually. I live in Martin County, which is a very, very red county. It's the county just north of Palm Beach County. And as I was coming home tonight, I was stopped at a traffic light right in front of this restaurant that is a Republican hangout. And in front of the restaurant, there were 6 or 7 people with, Trump flags waving at the traffic. And there was not one honk. There was not one wave. There was not one person shouting support for the president. And just imagine that you are in the reddest part of the Midwest. That's how red it is in Martin County. And I was stunned. I have to tell you, I was absolutely stunned. So, Ron, I'm hopeful. I don't believe he's going to get impeached, but the people that I talk to that are moderate Republicans are not happy with him right now, and they are paying attention to impeachment. So, the impeachment will energize his hardcore base. I mean, they love everything that he does, but I think that the NPAs and the more moderate Republicans are going to be watching very closely. I mean, we're going to have to work our butts off to get a Democrat elected, but I think we've got a shot.
Well, I think that can sort of lead us into a discussion of what we in Palm Beach Indivisibles, what we are doing to try and influence this election as best we can. We have a signature program that we call Neighbor Network for Good Government. We shorten it to N2G2, but it's basically a neighbor network for good government. I actually spent 10 years in Washington in 2 administrations, and I really believe in government and in good government. And so this program was developed by our leadership team because we were all heavily involved in the Clinton campaign in 2016. Matter of fact, I ran one of her offices in West Palm Beach, her main office in West Palm Beach. And there were many problems with that campaign, including the fact that Brooklyn and Tampa did not take into consideration that Florida was different from other parts of the country in that so many of our people live in gated communities and condominiums where it's very difficult to canvass, very difficult to get into those areas. So, and because of that, I don't think Palm Beach County delivered the kind of votes, and Southern Florida generally did not deliver the kind of votes that the Clinton campaign expected. So we developed a program to focus on getting out the vote in those areas, gated communities and condominiums. And the central point of the whole thing is to find people within each condominium or gated community to be our coordinators, either our neighborhood coordinators. They want to take on a little bit more. We can call them community coordinators. But their purpose is to develop a team, a platoon, whatever you want to call it, of people who are super hot Democrats and voters who recognize how important these elections are, and we are trying to organize from the ground up, not a mobilization for a candidate or for an election, but an organizing that's built around neighborhoods. I myself love to canvass. I love to talk to people. You can tell. You have to get a hook that takes me off the stage. But there is nothing better than being able to knock on a door and say, "Hi, I'm Ron Matzner, and I'm your neighbor. And I live just around the corner, and I'd like to consult with you about what's going on in this neighborhood because I have some concerns, and maybe you have the same concerns too. What are your feelings about, just the community here and the neighborhood here?" That always works. That really works. And it's not something you do in the last 2 weeks or the last month of the campaign. It's something you do, you start 2 years out, as we have, and you start to build teams of people, starting with those hot voters and moving on to less committed voters, kind of relying upon social peerage and the influence of being part of something to actually get people to vote.
Yeah, great. And we actually tonight, right now, as we're talking on this one, we have an organization called Dine with Dems that was in our area. That organization was a little bit more centered to, more so actually in the middle of Indivisible 6. And that group was doing about every month or two leading up to the last election, they would have a dinner meeting and have the candidates come and do a little conversation, a little bit of drinking, a little bit of eating, but it's not too different than what you're describing. And then also, you mentioned Mar-a-Lago, you mentioned all those communities, not having the access. You don't run into that too much here in Georgia. I guess there would be some, communities, but when you were describing that, another opportunity we're seeing, especially in our district, would be, I'm going to call them active living communities, because when I called them nursing homes, that was not the right thing to call them, if that makes sense. So these would be, folks who may be retired or soon to retire, but being able to find the folks that live in those facilities or areas and doing some similar actions as you just described. And we want to try to get back to that idea again. Having Vote Builder, from Indivisible National, that there's a gold mine of data that is in that to be able to specifically target people who are like-minded.
That is true. That is true. And so in our strategy for 2020, we are operating from the presumption that those people who voted in 2018 are likely to vote again. Whether they're what we would call super hot voters who have voted for the last 20 years, or whether they were people who tended not to vote during off-year elections but chose to do so in 2018 for the first time, I think they will all recognize how important this election is, and they're very, very, very likely to vote. So I think our strategy is to look at what we would call cold voters, people who have not voted for years and years and years. I met someone the other day, last Friday evening, and had some barbecue with them because I was recruiting them for Palm Beach Indivisibles to be part of this program, and I was shocked to find out that he had never voted. He was an African American. He was about 60 years old. He voted once in 2008 for Obama. And I asked him, why have you chosen not to vote? Because there are many people in his neighborhood who do vote. So, and basically his answer was, I never considered that my vote was important. I never thought that my vote alone would mean anything. And there's, hundreds, if not thousands of people in Palm Beach. I'm going to say there's hundreds of people normally in almost every one of our precincts who have that attitude, and if we can connect them with the super hot voters, create the teams that we're talking about, they will, through social contact, whether it's the Dine with Dems that you're talking about or events that we do or postcard writing, they will connect and be motivated to vote. That's what we hope will happen with the colds. The other thing we're going to do is aggressively pursue NPAs. Here in Florida, you can register as a Republican, a Democrat, or a non-aligned or independent, no party person. They cannot vote in primaries, but they obviously have a major impact on the general election. And in many of our precincts here in Florida, there's pretty much of an even division: 1/3 Democrats, 1/3 Republicans, and 1/3 NPAs. And of course, through the van, we have the ability to use the algorithms that are built into the Democratic Party van, which we use in Palm Beach Indivisibles. And that gives us algorithms telling us whether an NPA is likely to vote or not, Democratic or Republican. So if I just put into the van the names of the probability of voting Democratic, I can pull a list of those, and our people can then go after them as part of our team. So we hope to build beyond the Democratic base into the NPA community.
Yeah, certainly. Going back to these are all great, strategies, but going back to, the original thing, any other ideas beyond, once we are able to change, I'm calling them in a regime, by the way. I'm not sure if that's a popular topic, but I'm calling the Republicans a regime right now. Because if you look at the definition, at the definition, it's pretty spot on. But once
I think they like to think of themselves as a dynasty. I think they like to they envision themselves going on for 100 years, so like the Romanovs, this kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, hopefully it's a regime more so, and that can end soon. But we'll see. But once that happens, any other ideas around maintaining? I do feel like the personal contact that we've talked about here. People tend to act a little differently when you do have them person to person, that personal contact. And I go back to when I was in high school. There was I think it was the U.S. government class, and we had, some lectures and discussions on politics and calling it bandwagon politics. You can kind of have an issue, XYZ, whatever it is. And if you look around you and you see that, oh, well, it looks like everybody else is on this bandwagon, I maybe need to get on that bandwagon too, whether it's right or not, what have you. Obviously, we think we're right here, but that honestly is very powerful. People like to be in the, quote, right group and the group that most of the people are in. And if even the sentiment that you mentioned earlier, if you had those lonely people on the sidewalk waving the, regime flags, that they were not in the majority, it seems like, right?
No, not at all. It had to be. I liked how you said lonely. They had to be feeling pretty lonely, actually, right then. So yeah, for me, there are really two issues. Not just what do we do now in terms of rebuilding what has been broken down by this regime, but also trying to heal the nation, trying to unify the nation. It's really going to be difficult, no matter what happens in 2020. And I think it all begins with personal contact, with trying to reach across divides, to create bridges with people who may think differently but who are willing to have a conversation. And I'm not talking about someone who's just really entrenched and into the cult, because to me, the hard right crowd, it really behaved like a cult. But I'm talking about people who may not necessarily support exactly the same policies that I like, but maybe we have the same goals. And I think that, you can start a conversation with someone by finding out what their goals are. What would you like to have? Would you like to have affordable, good health care? Would you like to have clean air and clean water? Would you like your children to have a decent education? We can agree on that. Well, how do we get that done? How do we come together to make that work?
Certainly. And some other ideas that are out there. I've advocated within our group at times to, okay, yes, we're a political group, and we certainly are. We don't hide, what we happen to, with our political leanings. But there are other opportunities. We have the holidays coming up. potentially, using some of the money that we've collected under one of the pots in our group to do some, charitable contributions. I try to highlight, even through my company and the work that I do, and volunteer, contributions there as well. So I do feel like there are ways, and Veterans Day was Monday, this past Monday, and usually almost every veteran type issue or military type issue we usually can agree on. I think within the Indivisible, we think that we're probably spending too much money and we're probably warmongering too much. But at the end of the day, if you were in the military, we need to have supported you for sure.
I agree.
Let's see. Any other ideas, though, that you guys have thought about trying to take us beyond this, regime, hopefully, losing power here?
Hello, everybody, again. My phone died, so I am now on Barbara's phone.
No worries.
Oh, I didn't even know you. I didn't realize you were gone, Ron. You just got very quiet there.
I probably would have gone out and had something to eat, and you would never noticed.
No, we would have been calling for you at some point. Well, we have also sort of a community partner that we work with. It's Friends of Foster Children, and it's an organization that supports families who foster a relative's child. And those families are typically at a bit of a disadvantage because they don't get some of the same resources that a non-relative would get when fostering a child. And I agree with you, Robert. I think when we come together for the greater good, whether it's for political reasons or maybe just intentionally not political reasons, that's really an opportunity to connect with different people, because I think most people want to think of themselves as good people, and most people want to do good in the world. So that's a way to maybe bring different people together for a good common goal. And once you have that relationship, then you can maybe begin to explore a little bit about other issues, about the political issues.
Robert, may I ask, what's the composition of the sounds like the gerrymandered district that you're part of, and what's the demographics of GA-11, of your Indivisible group?
Yeah, and I have to pull up there's a Cook score. Does that sound familiar?
The click score.
Cook score. So I think it's around.
Cook score. No, I haven't heard of that.
I think it's leaning like plus Republican 11 or 12, but I don't know that is currently accurate. Because the district is so gerrymandered and it just cuts out the sliver here and there. On the other side of the district, if you go further west, is a very Democratic-leaning district that's been kind of cut out and slivered over on that side. So it's kind of in the middle here, and then if you keep going further northwest, that one is a bit of a lost cause. The guy Tom Graves has that district. It's just way out, I call them the boonies up there. But it's I'd have to pull up the actual demographics. But even with demographics like that, there's a gentleman. I travel a bit for work, and I take a Lyft and Uber to the airport at times. But there was an older African American gentleman that picked me up, take me down to the airport, and he mentioned, he goes, "I got to get out of that house. My wife is driving me crazy." And we had a really, really good conversation, because from my house down to the airport, it's pushing about 30, 40 minutes down there. Really nice older gentleman. But he moved down here, retired from working as a steel worker up near Chicago, and was a union worker, We didn't get into politics. I don't talk politics with everybody. I usually let somebody else pick up the politics conversation. But I'm pretty sure he would be one of our voters. But one of the biggest reasons he moved down here was the cost of living, and we do see a lot of folks that move to Georgia, maybe down to Florida, for the cost of living difference between up north and the weather too. I mean, we don't get a lot of snow, and certainly down there you don't get snow compared to what he was getting in Chicago. But he was a lot of fun to talk to, and we have a very diverse Metro Atlanta area, even within our district. But the further east you go from here, there are parts like Beaufort Highway that you look out left and right down Beaufort Highway, you actually don't see any English. And they're all foreign languages on all the signs over there.
Interesting.
So it is a very interesting and I think a very exciting area to live in. You cannot be bored living in Metro Atlanta. If you're bored living in Metro Atlanta, you're doing something wrong.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I think we want to get back to the things we would like to focus on as we go forward. Here in Florida, people think of us around the country as a purple state, but we are a solid red state.
No, I don't agree with that.
Other than South Florida, from the Martin County line that you're talking about, or somewhere south of that, down to Miami, it's a blue island in a Red Sea. And maybe there's other little islands, Tampa and Orlando, but basically it's pretty red. And one of the things that we're trying to do in our program, in Neighbor Network and everything else we're doing, is educating people to the fact that there's more to voting than just the presidential election or even a governor's race, because down ballot votes are really important. And voting in your municipal elections, your county elections, your state elections are as vital as voting in a presidential election. So that's one of the strategies we're trying to pursue through our organization. In Florida, when I would guess it had to be in 2017 when I first got involved in things. We have a Senate here with 40 members. It was 24. Let's see. Let me get this right. It was something like 26 to 14. And in many of the counties and districts around the state, the Democrats didn't even put anybody up, didn't run anyone for election. Gradually, over the last couple of years, we've now gotten this to the point where it's about 20. It may be 22 and 18. I'm not sure. Maybe 23 and 17. But we're getting close enough now that we can make the pitch to people that if we really get out the vote, we can flip the Florida Senate. That's really, really, really important. So it's not just, focusing on Trump or even focusing on 2021. It's what we can do right now down ballot to make a difference.
Yeah,
that's a really good point.
I was able to get those statistics. Yeah, our district's 67% white, 16% African American, 12% Hispanic, and 3% Asian, 0.5% Native American.
And does your organization, Georgia 11, the Indivisibles, mirror that? Do you have a mix of diversity in your membership?
We honestly need more. Our group is primarily white, but I would admit that we need more than that.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any ideas on how to do that? Because that's one of the issues that bedevils us as well.
Open for suggestions. It goes to even Stacey Abrams admits that is one of the problems that plagues Georgia, and that goes all the way back to the Southern strategy. That's what I keep blaming over and over again, identity politics. We see it sometimes even, I honestly see it sometimes within our progressive groups. And some of the things that happen, and I see. I step back and I try to call it out where appropriate. But it's difficult to try to pull that in. Actually, and speaking of that, the last election, the gentleman that ran against the incumbent was an African American man, and it was actually great to see. The Facebook page is actually still out there. We're in with Flynn because his name was Flynn Brody. But seeing how we were able to bring in all of those other like-minded folks. But that actually is a good point, that we should go back and try to bring those folks in, because we certainly agree with them on almost every single political point, and then try to embrace and bring everybody together for sure.
Okay. Did you go up to Washington for did you attend the Indivisibles August meeting, the National Campaign Network meeting?
I did not, but one of our other leaders did, and networked with some of the other groups. I saw some meetings with congressional leaders and staffers and so forth. But no, unfortunately, I was not able to make it. But
I was able to attend part of it, and I was rather inspired by the whole thing. I just thought that Indivisible has really grown and turned themselves into a national force, and I was inspired by what I saw up there.
Well, I think it's important to remember, it's important to remember how we got started. Of course, the guy that's in the White House is mostly what drove all this, but
right.
But Ezra and I can't remember her name, Leah, right?
Leah.
Yeah,
Ezra and Leah. They were congressional staffers, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Correct.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay. This is all coming off memory, making sure I got this right. And then their, congressional leaders were, moved out. But this whole strategy of continuing to hammer your elected member of Congress who you do not agree with, it certainly has worked for us. Our congressional member, he barely leaves his house. So we actually have a term for him.
Sounds like Marco Rubio.
Yeah, I mean, we call him Beltway Barry because he just pretty much stays, up in D.C. And he does not list his public events because he is so worried and doesn't do town halls because he's so worried about going on the record and some of the stuff that are just embarrassing that comes out of his mouth. So it works. And this whole strategy of, and even going back to what you were saying earlier, if you're going to knock on your neighbor's door and saying, do you realize we're represented by this person? And when you point these things out, it really typically holds, and it goes to the ballot box. I'm like, I'm not voting for that guy. I remember he said X, Y, Z. So it does work. And I think there was an Indivisible group even up in the Northeast that they even ran their congressional guy up on the roof that one time because they kept going every Friday. So it works.
So do you have any particular strategies that you can share with us that you are focusing on for 2020?
Let's see. We're doing some fundraising because ultimately to do any sort of advertising, the advertisers don't give you free advertising. So that is where we hit our biggest brick wall. We did all of the billboards last election. I still say if you look at how the slim margin that Lucy McBath won, the billboards that we ran with Indivisible 6, I just look back at that election and say, what if we had not run those billboards? Because I think you guys have I-95 that comes through your area, right?
Yeah,
Correct,
we do.
Yeah.
We do. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. see I-75, which I think goes on the other side of your state. I-75 goes through our district, but several of those billboards were running on I-75. And we do some Facebook ads, and you're able to see the immediate reactions because people go in and comment and all that kind of stuff. And we struggle with the whole thing of, do we moderate comments? I say no. I say leave everything out there, because even our congressman has moderated our comments in the past, and we almost took him to court over it because he was, and he does not do it anymore. But the billboards, the billboard company we used, or one of them, I remember getting an email from the guy, and he says, I think you're going to appreciate this, because one of the billboards we were running, and it goes back to one of the points you made a moment ago, people think their vote does not matter. And I was talking to some friends, and they said, you know what, if somebody paid me to go vote, I may go vote. And I had to bite my tongue, just as someone involved in politics. I just kind of got under my skin. But it turned into a campaign, we're too poor to vote Republican.
Oh.
But next to the Republican is the old Russian sickle and hammer imagery.
Nice.
Very good.
I like it.
That campaign over and over again has received more reaction, both positive and negative. But that campaign over and over again has gotten the most reaction. We ran a digital billboard this would be actually in District 6 is where that particular digital billboard was. The lady called the billboard company, and she asked them to immediately take it down because it was embarrassing her neighborhood. And, of course, they said that's not how this works. It's already been paid.
How expensive are billboard ads like that?
That one, you can negotiate, but they did a really good, the guy we worked with, they had several digital billboards around the area, and at one point leading up to the last election, we had about 15 running around the metro area. Now, they were digital. They were rotating with other folks, but that whole month that we had the 13 running, I want to say it was less than $2,000. They're not as expensive as you think they might be. And then there's also...
That's very interesting, Robert. That's very interesting.
Yeah, and there's also bullets out there too. And especially if you're driving through rural areas, the rural billboards are not near as much as the other areas. And and if you're a rural area, it may be more likely to pick up media attention, because I'm from South Georgia originally, and there's not a whole lot going on in South Georgia. If you were to put a billboard in a rural area, that tends to make people start talking.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting. I think one of the other things that, go back to some of the other stuff we were talking about, I think for many reasons, including the fact that civics aren't taught any longer in schools, many of our citizens, particularly those who are relatively new to the country, I don't really think they understand how our system works. I don't think they understand what's been going on in this country over the last 20 years or so. I think most people think that, elections are fair. There's one Democrat and one Republican, and they got an equal chance to win, and the better man wins. And I don't think people understand just how much this country has become a nation run by a minority government. That I think a lot of people don't really understand why they'll look at a poll, and the poll says 75% of the people in the country believe in climate change or something like that, and then wonder why their leaders do the exact opposite. And that's one of the things that, as we canvass and as we talk to people in our neighborhoods, we're trying to get across to people that your vote, going back to the idea of why voting is important, your vote is so important because it helps to reflect the real nature of our democracy, the real nature of what people want, as opposed to what a minority are imposing upon us, and they are enforcing that. One of the things we're trying to teach the people is how the Republican Party has used their power to restrict voting in many, many different ways. And by encouraging people to understand that and come out and vote, they are doing their part to reverse this process, and it's going to take a little bit of time. But that's something I think we all need to focus on. As part of saving democracy, we have to get around or end the gerrymandering and the limitations upon voting that the Republican Party is fostering. And you had that for sure in Georgia in 2018.
Mm-hmm. And it's available to you guys. I can send you the link and all the information about it, but it was called Suppress the Right to Vote. Did you guys happen to hear about that movie that was created?
Yes.
No.
Mm-hmm. I did.
So I can get all the information to you, but it's free. What the company that made it, they're a nonprofit, but what they try to do is encourage a movie watch party. And I can get you all the information. But part of that was shot in South Georgia, where my grandfather was born, in Randolph County, where they were trying to close the polling locations. There were some strong reactions when I went to the watch party for that. So that would any sentiment that you're getting that my vote does not matter, if you watch that, it should definitely change your mind.
Yeah.
Well, if you could send us the information about that, because that sounds like something maybe we might want to show to our membership.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
So probably we're up to about an hour here. We could keep going if you want, but maybe consider wrapping it up here too. Any other takeaways or any thoughts? I guess last minute because of the timeliness of the impeachment stuff, but I don't know if there's anything that's really jumped out in front of me. I think all the typical stuff has happened with the impeachment hearings, but anything that has jumped out at you all about them?
Well, I was at work today, but I did sneak a little bit, and I understand that, and of course I'm going to forget his name, Taylor, the first man who testified, the first ambassador who testified, apparently received additional information after his deposition to Congress, and one of his aides actually heard, if I'm saying this correctly, the president speaking about this aid to Ukraine being held up, and specifically linked to the investigation. So I think the testimony today was pretty powerful, and I'm going to have to go back and try to watch it.
I think my kind of feeling about it is that I almost wish that the Mueller report had been more definitive, because it's not, this is very focused. This is like a laser beam on just a very small bit of what Trump has done. But almost every action he has taken since he's been in office, almost everything he's done is an obstruction of justice itself. Everything he's done about this whistleblower event is obstruction of justice in my view. Because I'm a lawyer, I kind of see beyond just the minuscule part of this that they're focusing on, and I'm just not sure the American people appreciate all that. One of the main differences, when I told you that I used to work in the Soviet Union, one of the main differences between America and Russia and most of the world at that time was the corruption that was everywhere in the Soviet Union, and it didn't exist here. But in the course of this administration, we have seen corrupt practices just explode across the entire government. Almost, it's not just Trump himself, but it seems that all the people he's put into different positions of authority are using their time in office to feather their own nest. People like Paul Manafort, it wasn't just that he violated some technicalities of tax law or administrative law. He was a key figure for years and years to bring this culture of corruption to Washington to the point where it's starting to, in my view, rival what I used to see in the Soviet Union in the days when I was there. But that's just my view of it.
Yeah, and just alone, I mean, I've even been quoted my state representative that she's been in the Georgia House since 1997, and I don't want to date myself or do this on purpose. I graduated from high school in 1998. To tell you how long that she has been in the Georgia House. But she and I finally had a conversation. I pinned her down, and I told her, I said, I'm tired of apologizing to Canadians for being American. And a prime example of this, that the immigrant children that have been put into custody, over 69,000 children separated from their parents. I equate this to vacationing in another country, but going to the customs officer and them saying, sorry, parent, your child has to go over there, you go over there for processing. Or even what's going on right now, on top of that, welcome to our country, we need you to spit in this tube for your DNA, please. That is what's going on in our country right now. And it's embarrassing.
Yeah, it is embarrassing. When I used to be, again, overseas, people looked up to America. They just wanted their own country to have the opportunities, the respect for law, the respect for other people generally that existed here in this country. And in the space of 2 or 3 years, this administration is destroying all of that. It's so that's kind of an overarching issue that I think, again, isn't getting enough play in the media, and it's really hard to present, to people you meet on the street, because there's just not enough time or bandwidth to deal with it.
But I actually think that, going back to one of the sentiments there, going forward, I mean, we are pretty sure this regime is going to be taken out, but just remembering, I mean, people remember the Holocaust. And so using that imagery of children screaming, crying for their parents in these concentration camps, but they're immigrant children, as a reminder, do we really want to go back to an administration like that again? And it literally, these things happen. This is not like this is some, weird Twilight Zone we're living in. These things actually are happening, and trying to make sure that people really understand the gravity of what is really happening. Oh, and by the way, going back to your other point, a lot of these places these folks are being held in are in private detention centers for profit.
Right.
That's right. That's absolutely right.
Yeah.
Well, we could probably do this, Robert, for hours. As I said, I love to talk about this stuff, but I guess we should probably wrap this up, because probably Laura, you, Robert, probably want to have dinner here tonight and not go to bed hungry.
But I think this went really well. And thanks again for doing this. We'll button it up and record it. But any other parting words you guys can think of before we end the recording here?
Just rest and rest if you need to, but just remember that we have to keep going. That's all. Mm-hmm. Keep your eyes on the prize.
That's right. We have about 50 days, 55 days between now and the election, and we have to use every one of those days to make sure that we get out the vote so that we can get rid of Trump.
Absolutely. That's goal number one.
Yeah, the other side certainly is not stopping, and they got lots of money.
Yep.
They certainly do. Okay, well, I think I've taken a lot away from this, and Laura, you and I have some things to think about. After listening to Robert. So thank you, Robert, for inviting us to do this. I think this is great. If you would want to do it again sometime in the future, I'm up for it anytime.
Yeah, give us a yell.
Yeah, great, certainly. And have a good week there.
All right, thanks.
You too. Good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.